All right, all right. It's 3 o'clock or a little bit after. So anyway, hopefully you had a good weekend, and here we are Monday afternoon. It's kind of a cool, drizzly afternoon here in Virginia, which was actually kind of nice. It was rather warm and humid over the weekend, so kind of enjoying the rain. We definitely could use some around here. Um, Looks like the weather in London was a little bit more severe though over the weekend, huh? All right, so today I'm going to kind of ease back into the little journal. I've got the rest of this week, so counting today, that's 5 more days plus next Monday, so that's 6 more days of this. And I'm not rushing to try to like finish this journal. I kind of feel like there will be, like some of the pages will be a little bit sparse, and maybe not completely filled, but that's fine because then I can just continue working in it. Maybe I have to continue doing some live streaming during June. So anyway, today I was kind of wanting to ease back into the week. I don't work on this outside of this time that I'm doing it here, at least not for May. Maybe in the future I will, but so I haven't worked in it over the weekend, and I really didn't do any art over the weekend. So feeling a little rusty. Just kind of need to ease back into things. So I thought I'd go ahead and do some drawing. And somebody had asked a couple weeks ago, I think, about demonstrating how I do this web kind of imagery. And so I thought I'd go ahead and do that as well today. Today's a good day to do that. So a little bit of background about this web imagery. If you're not familiar with it, a few years ago, probably closer to 5 or 6 years ago, I developed this sort of web. That's the only way I could kind of describe it. This web-like imagery of crisscrossing lines, and I had done it. Started doodling it actually in my big visual journal, and then started making some bigger artwork around it. And eventually, I was using maps to create the line. So I was doing a lot of superimposing of the lines, um, and that would build up sort of all these different lines that crisscrossed, and that's the key, is that things crisscross. And I set a rule for myself. So anywhere two lines crisscrossed, there couldn't be a sharp corner. And so all those little connections, all those little intersections had to be rounded off. And what happened was it created this very organic, very almost like tissue looking, or cells. And I really became fascinated with it. And when I tied it into doing using maps, I was able to really tie it into place, and did a whole series called Home, where I used the places that I've lived and the places that my wife has lived, and created these layered works of this kind of webby kind of imagery. And it's something that I continue using in the journal, not so much in standalone artwork much, but definitely in the journal. And it really is a symbol of connection. And what was really interesting is that within the last year, I actually saw something online. I'd never seen anything like this imagery before. Didn't know of anybody that was really doing it. And then about a year ago, I discovered, or actually came across, I think somebody on social media posted about it. One of my friends, one of my acquaintances, and I looked at it, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that looks a lot like my web kind of imagery. And they called it neurographic art. And that was developed, I was just doing some research, it was developed by a Russian psychiatrist back in 2014. And it's really kind of, I haven't really studied too much about it, but just sort of glanced at some things online. And it's kind of like this notion that you're, um, it, a lot of people tie it into like Zentangle, and how the benefits of Zentangle, that the idea of that it's calming, kind of lets you sit and reflect on things. And for me, that's how this really was. I mean, it's really this reflective kind of drawing, because it's very simple, but it keeps you engaged enough to where, like, your mind still kind of churns and turns, but you think of other things, you reflect on other things, and it does sort of, at least for me, have this very kind of calming effect. So I developed this webby imagery independent of this kind of neurographic artwork. So that idea of neurons, of like, you know, your brain, your mind, the nerves in your brain, the neurons, and so it sort of has a very organic look to it. But I don't call mine neurographic art. I mean, to me, it's still kind of this web imagery. But I thought I'd go ahead and show you sort of my process for that, as well as some other kind of drawing things. So anyway, if you want to follow along, awesome. So if you are tuning in and you want to say hi in the comments, I always appreciate seeing who's out there and where you're tuning in from. Of course, many of you, just by seeing your name, now I know where you are, because you've tuned in quite a bit. So I appreciate that. And if anybody is new tuning in, awesome. You can always check out the other videos on Facebook, on my Facebook page, or also on YouTube. So anyway, let's go ahead and let me flip this over. So I've just pulled out my Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pens. So I've got different colors, and I've got my set of black here. And I'm going to just use these. I've turned to this page because I think this will be a good page to sort of do that web kind of imagery. And I'm going to use this dark, they call it magenta, this dark pen. It's kind of a very dark reddish violet, like a red violet, not quite the bright magenta that some folks might be used to. And one of the reasons I picked this was I really like this face, but when I was flipping through it earlier, I noticed this, and I thought this was really interesting how, you know, with the circle, so if I had the web sort of focus on this circle and come out, it'd be framed by this circle, and that might make a really interesting contrast. So I just kind of felt like that was interesting. And then if I continue it over here, I could really fill this whole space up if I wanted to. I don't know if I'll do all of that today, but anyway, so I've got my pen. You could do this with any kind of pen or marker. I've done it with paintbrushes, even though it's a little bit more tedious with a paintbrush because you're constantly dipping back and forth. I've done it with acrylic paint markers, but this pen works really, really well for it. And I get a nice thin line, but I'll end up thickening the lines. So this is that web imagery. And if you've ever done the neurographic art, then you'll kind of see why I feel like they're definitely related. Like I said, when I saw the neurographic art, I was just like, oh, wait a minute, somebody's copying me. But sort of, I think it was that notion of two independent things coming up. So I'm going to start off with just kind of going over that circle. And then I'm going to start to create lines. And I just want to kind of those same kind of lines that I've been doing. You know, nothing too different, just that now they're coming out away from that circle. And so this circle will be sort of that focal point. But I can also, well, actually, you know, it might be interesting to have it go through the top and bottom circle. Just do something a little different. And then come over here and then stop. Maybe it picks up as it comes over there. So what I do, let me go ahead and I'll draw in a couple other lines that crisscross. So the crisscrossing lines are important, but they can also branch out, just sort of like roads can. And I picked this page partly because there's not so much going on with it. And so then I'll really be able to kind of see that web. So by crisscrossing, I start to create the web. And when I was doing this with the maps, I projected maps up on a canvas or on a piece of paper, and I superimposed different locations on top of each other. And so the roads became the web. Okay, so that got a whole bunch of them going. I've kind of fractured that space almost. So then what I do is I start to thicken the lines. And the idea is that there's no sharp corners. So I round off all of the corners. So like right here where things crisscross, I round that over. Then I come over here and I round that over. So the neurographic art might be a little bit different. I've never actually done that process. But I think you kind of do more like random circles and like wavy, curvy lines. I don't know if there's like something very specific. Like I said, I've kind of done a little bit of research, but haven't really looked it up too much. So I've sort of rounded off. Now this is a little bit awkward, so I'm just gonna like connect that. And so again, I have to round off all the corners. And so what that does, it really starts to thicken up where the lines crisscross. Now, like I said, I can always, I just end up adding more lines as I'm going. That might be another way that this sort of differs from the neurographic art. I think with neurographic art, you kind of do a series of lines and then you go back and you do what I'm doing. You thicken the lines and you round off the corners. But I think from at least the examples I've seen, it doesn't look like they add a whole lot of extra lines later in the process. But like I said, I don't know. But you can start to see how those lines start to get thicker. And for me, this is a very kind of meditative, very mindful way of drawing. And I've done this and just like sat for hours drawing these. Like I said, I've done it with the pen, I've done it with paint, I've done it with the paint markers. I think what I'll try to do is when I'm done today is to post a picture of some of the webs and post it there in the comments if people want to see. So where there's like really acute angles, they end up kind of being a little bit thicker at the intersections, just to try to round off. So again, my rule, and this is, like I said, I had never heard of neurographic art when I started doing these. And actually I can kind of trace it back to a tree that I painted in my big journal. And what was interesting is that I used red paint, but I painted a tree and I painted a trunk. And just by painting the branches of the tree, and then, it just ended up that where the branches came out, it was all these rounded lines and shapes. And I really liked that. And then, it looked like blood vessels. And I thought that was really interesting. And I just started doodling a lot in my journal. And I just kind of came up with that rule that, okay, it can't have any sharp corners. And that really led to a very organic, very biological feel. And so it's a very slow process. So I often will turn to this whenever I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't know what to draw or what to add. It's another way of getting my hand moving. So sometimes what I like to do is to like pick a line and kind of make it really extra thick. And so that way there's some variety and it's not just all kind of the same thickness. Especially using a thin pen like this, it can be very easy for all the lines to kind of stay the same thickness. But by having some lines that are much thicker and some that are much thinner, it just creates a lot of visual interest. So I don't want to get any ink underneath, so I'm going to take my little card. I really like how that's turning out, actually. So that, again, that's just going to keep the page underneath cleaner, because what I want to do is I want to come around and make a circle around this. And so now those start to connect. So as I work, sometimes I just kind of feel like, oh, I need to add a line there, and I just add it. I'm trying to have some like big open spaces and then some small open spaces, some thick lines and some thin lines. So much of what I do in the journal kind of happens pretty quickly that It's nice to sometimes just sort of slow down, kind of linger on a page. And I often find that, especially in the beginning, like when you start a page or you start a journal, it's like as you're adding big swatches of paint or pieces of collage, it's like things change so quickly. And just kind of thinking about everything that I've done so far in this little book, it's like so much of it happened pretty fast. And the pages, I was able to build up the pages quickly with layers and with materials and with imagery. And then something like this just slows you down. But kind of feels very appropriate for a drizzly, chilly Monday. So it's just a matter of going through, thickening the lines, and just that rule. There's no sharp corners, and so all the corners just get rounded off. So it just kind of has that feel of like kind of like tissue or cells. It does kind of look like blood vessels, but then blood vessels don't really connect like this. Blood vessels tend to branch off. And the thing is, I'm not expecting to kind of fill this whole thing in just one sitting. Like I said, this takes a while. but I'll get a good start on it. I just find that this is something that I'll come back to time and time again, adding more and more. And definitely using it on this page with the red colors definitely gives it that sort of tissuey, like biological feel. Yeah, I guess like I was saying, I've always just called these webs, and then discovered that term neurographic. So I could just sit here and, and do this for quite a while, but like I said, I'll come back to it. I do kind of want to get into some other things too, so that's a good kind of stopping point for this. And I'm going to continue around here. Just really probably end up filling this whole little spread, but like I was saying, I really liked this hole here and how that lined up, and just that sort of framing. Might be interesting to use a different color and continue some of this out here, but I don't know if I'll do that or not. So anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and just stop with this little part. But I'm going to just like flip through and find some other spaces. So there, last week before, whatever, I was adding some drawing to some of these pages using some of the punchinella and drawing some shapes. I think that's kind of what I want to do next, is just kind of flip through, find some spaces to think about adding some of the ink, draw some shapes, trace the punchinella, just, you know, like even when I did something like this with the thick black lines. I'm thinking like one here might be interesting to have. have some squares coming down. So sometimes I do use stencils and tracing templates when I do this kind of stuff. But then other times I just sort of freehand it. With this book, it's not important that things are like precisely drawn. And I can get really caught up in like trying to be really perfectionist about things. So just kind of forcing myself to freehand stuff helps me not become so attached to that trying to make something perfect. But, just squares, just repeat the squares that are over here. I feel like this needs something else, but I'm not really sure. Thinking of how I might add some drawing to it, but I'm not sure yet. I know my approach to journaling can be a little different than what people are used to, especially since I jump around so much and I don't really work in chronological order. But I think that's part of the fun, and that's just another way to kind of think about how everything ties together. And so from the very beginning of this book, I really wanted it to tie together, to be more of a cohesive visual narrative. And so, like, thinking about these circles, well, I use the same color up here. Now I used a different template, but still the circles, same color, starts to tie it in. It's just trying to think of this book as a whole and not just a collection of separate pages. But there's nothing wrong with thinking of a journal or a book as a bunch of separate pages. just looking at these photos here, I was thinking about how I might connect or like frame. So I like to use thick lines sometimes to frame things off. So I was just thinking it might be interesting, maybe not to frame the whole thing, but bring in a thick line. So I've got a lot of organic things going on. I do have some squares and rectangles. So just to kind of bring in a more geometric element that ties in with the squares and the rectangles. But the color definitely ties in with the rest of the page too. So as I flip through the pages, I just sort of let that my intuitive mind take over. And so I'm just constantly like scanning pages, and sometimes I'll just have a random thought like, oh, I need to put a thick line right there. And so what I try to do is I try to listen to that instead of being like, oh no, that's going to ruin it. I just sort of say, why not? So that's how it was with this. I was just kind of flipping through. It's like, oh, I need something there. And so what I was thinking is that, I've got it on this side. So just holding the book up so I can kind of mark where those lines are. So again, this is just that idea of wrapping around the page. I'm just kind of thinking like, oh, maybe not. Okay. So Frances is saying that she says, we seem to have got stuck. So I'm wondering if the video's having some problems. Have you ever run into a problem where a video seems to get stuck? Sometimes just refresh your browser. So I don't know if anybody else is having problems. I don't see any problems on my end. I like that contrast between the very geometric lines and the more organic. But what's really interesting is that there are other geometric things going on, but they're a little bit more subtle. And this definitely is, because it's so dark and thick, really um, kind of stands out. But I like that contrast. But this is a great way to sort of add some things. And I really like thickening the lines, just to make them very, very bold and really pull them out. So whether it, I did that earlier with these leaf-like shapes, that really helped them kind of stand out. That's probably what like pages like this are missing right now. And even something like this, it just seems like it needs to have something else. Yeah, pretty much a lot of them do. And I'm going to get into that more. It's what I call embellishing. But that's definitely something, you can embellish anytime. You can make things thick. You can make things bold anytime that you want. But I think that's a good stopping point. I didn't finish the web here, but, like I said, I always come back and work on things later, or maybe this is just all the further it gets. Sometimes that happens. It's like you work on something, you're like, oh, well, maybe it just stops there and it doesn't have to be finished. I probably will come back and work on it later, but still have a lot to add to these pages that I've kind of started recently. But it's easy to kind of get caught up. That takes a lot of time to do that. So anyway, like I said, I think that hopefully that will, so, that kind of wraps it up for today. Sorry, I kind of got distracted there. So, I'm going to be back tomorrow. Not really sure what I'll work on tomorrow, but this is like slowly kind of building. And, these just, I find that at the beginning of something, it goes really, really fast. You do these things and make really drastic changes, and then you sort of slow down and you're building things or like adding things. And it just takes a little bit more time. But I think that's sort of like it's like polishing, it's like you're using finer and finer polishing materials. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, so that's kind of wraps it up for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. It looks like Francis may have had some problems, but the recording is always going to be here on Facebook, so you can always watch it. And it's also going to be on YouTube. So anyway, appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, let me know. Pop them into the comments, and I will see you. Well, I won't see you, but you will see me hopefully tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be back tomorrow. So as always, happy creating. Thank you so much.